with me because what I'm about to tell you is the most terrifying experience I've ever had in my life. I still get nightmares about it, and honestly, I don't think I'll ever be the same again. It all started when my best friend Olivia and I found the perfect house to rent in Echo Park, Los Angeles. We'd been looking for months, but everything was either too expensive or in a sketchy neighborhood. Then we found it, a beautiful 3-bedroom house with hardwood floors, a spacious kitchen, and a backyard. The best part? The rent was just within our budget. The catch? We needed one more roommate to make it work. At first, we weren't sure about living with a stranger, but Olivia's coworker Julian was looking for a place. He was quiet, polite, and seemed like the ideal tenant. He had a steady job working remotely in IT and didn't seem like the type to throw wild parties or bring over random people. We thought we hit the jackpot. For the first few weeks, everything was great. Julian kept to himself, paid his rent on time, and even cooked dinner for us a couple of times. If anything, he was too quiet, but we figured he was just the introverted type. Then we noticed something strange. From the day he moved in, Julian made it very clear that the guest bedroom was off limits. At first, we didn't think much of it. Everyone has their quirks, right? Maybe he just wanted a space for storage or had sentimental items he didn't want touched. But the way he emphasized it was odd. He told us he had important work stuff in there and that we were never to open the door. Ever. That should have been a red flag. One night, Olivia and I were watching a movie when we heard something coming from that room. It wasn't loud, just a faint shuffling, almost like someone moving furniture. I looked at Olivia, and she looked at me. Julian was out that night. "There's no way," Olivia whispered. We walked over to the door and pressed our ears against it. Nothing. Dead silence. But the second we started walking away, thud. We nearly jumped out of our skin. The next morning, we casually asked Julian about it. He laughed it off and said it was probably the wind shaking the house, but something in his eyes made my stomach twist. It wasn't just the way he dodged the question. It was the way he smiled, like he was waiting for us to ask. That was when things started getting weird. After that night, Olivia and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about Julian. At first, we tried to brush it off. Maybe we were just overthinking things. Maybe the noise was just the house settling. But then, the visitors started showing up. It was always late, past midnight, when Julian would let them in through the back door. At first, we assumed they were just friends, but they never stayed long. They'd slip inside, stay for maybe 5 minutes, then leave. No small talk, no hanging out, just in and out like some kind of transaction was happening. One night, I stayed up late working on an assignment in the living room when I heard the back door open. I peeked through the blinds and saw a man stepping inside. His hoodie was pulled low over his face and he looked nervous, twitchy almost. Something about him freaked me out. I decided to pretend I didn't see anything, but as I was getting up to go to my room, I caught a glimpse of something on the counter. A phone, one I'd never seen before. I grabbed it instinctively, thinking Julian had left it there. But when I turned on the screen, my stomach dropped. Dozens of texts. "Package ready. Where do I drop it? Meet at the usual spot. Bring cash. Tell me you didn't leave any evidence." I felt sick. Before I could do anything, Julian came back into the room. His eyes flicked to the phone in my hand, and for a split second, his expression changed. Not anger, not fear, but something calculated. "You shouldn't be touching things that aren't yours," he said. I stammered some excuse and practically ran to my room, locking the door behind me. That was the moment I realized we didn't know Julian at all. A week later, Olivia left town for the weekend to visit her boyfriend. That was the first time I truly felt unsafe in the house. It was just me and Julian. He barely spoke to me, but I could feel his eyes on me whenever I moved around the house. I started locking my bedroom door at night, double-checking the windows before I went to sleep. Then, on Sunday night, something happened that made my blood run cold. I got home late from a shift at work and immediately noticed something was missing. Olivia's favorite jacket wasn't hanging by the door where she always left it. I checked her room. Her drawers had been rummaged through, her jewelry box open. Julian was sitting on the couch, acting like nothing was wrong. "Hey, have you been in Olivia's room?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked up at me and smirked. "Why? You think I took something?" I felt my stomach drop. I didn't answer. I just turned around and locked myself in my room. That night I barely slept, convinced that at any moment Julian would try to come inside. The next morning, when Olivia got back, she freaked out. She said some of her clothes were missing, along with a bracelet her mom had given her. And then we found it. A small Polaroid photo, half tucked under the door of the locked guest room. It was a picture of Olivia, taken from inside the house. At that point, Olivia and I knew we had to do something. We couldn't just ignore the fact that Julian was stealing our things, bringing sketchy people into the house, and, worst of all, taking pictures of us without our knowledge. The problem was, he was always home. So we waited. On Friday night, Julian told us he was going out for a work thing and wouldn't be back until late. The second we heard the front door close, Olivia and I sprang into action. We ran straight to the guest room. The door was locked, of course, but Olivia had a bobby pin, and after a few minutes of struggling, the lock clicked open. I hesitated before pushing the door. Something felt wrong. We stepped inside, and the smell hit us first. Stale air, something damp and almost metallic. The room was dimly lit by a small desk lamp, casting long shadows over piles of boxes stacked against the walls. And then we saw it. Polaroids. Dozens of them taped to the mirror above the desk. Some were of us. Candid shots taken around the house while we were cooking, watching TV, even sleeping. Others were of women we didn't recognize, all with fear in their eyes. Olivia was shaking. "What the hell is this?" Then I saw the notebook on the desk. I flipped it open and skimmed the pages. It was detailed logs, names, dates, places. Some entries had been scratched out completely. Others ended with a single word. Gone. My blood turned to ice. Before I could process any of it, Olivia grabbed my arm. "We need to get out now." But then the front door creaked open. Julian was back early. We froze, barely breathing as we heard his footsteps slowly moving through the house. Thud. 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 I reached for my phone, but my hands were shaking so badly that I nearly dropped it. Olivia grabbed me and yanked me into the closet, shutting the door just as Julian's footsteps reached the hallway. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then, the guest room door opened. Silence. I could feel Olivia trembling next to me. Neither of us dared to move. Then Julian laughed. Not a normal laugh. A low, knowing chuckle, like he had been expecting this. "I was hoping you'd find this room," he said, his voice calm. "I wanted you to understand." I squeezed my eyes shut, gripping Olivia's arm so hard I thought I might bruise her. Footsteps, getting closer. The closet door ripped open and Julian's cold, empty eyes locked onto mine. "You shouldn't have come in here," he whispered. Then he lunged. Olivia screamed. I kicked out, hitting him in the stomach, and we ran. We barely made it to the front door when he grabbed Olivia's hoodie, yanking her back. She fought like hell, twisting and kicking, and I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed the nearest lamp and smashed it against his head. He dropped like a sack of bricks. We didn't stop. We bolted out the door, down the street, and straight to a neighbor's house, pounding on the door until they let us in and called 911. The last thing I saw before the police arrived was Julian standing in our doorway, his face expressionless, watching us. The cops showed up within minutes. By the time they entered the house, Julian was gone. They searched every room, every closet, even the backyard. Nothing. It was like he had vanished into thin air. But inside the guest room, they found everything: the photos, the notebook, and something far worse. A trapdoor hidden beneath the rug. It led to a crawl space. Inside, a small soundproofed area with chains bolted to the floor, a mattress, a knife. I felt sick. Olivia and I gave our statements and the police launched a full investigation. Turns out Julian wasn't even his real name. He had multiple aliases and a history of disappearing whenever people got too close to the truth. The women in the photos, most of them were missing persons. The realization hit me like a truck. If we hadn't found that room when we did, we might have ended up on that wall too. For weeks, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, that cold, knowing smile. Olivia and I moved out immediately, breaking our lease. We packed up our things in broad daylight, with friends watching our backs, just in case. We never heard from Julian again, but then about a month later, something happened that still haunts me to this day. One night, I got a text message from an unknown number. I miss our late-night talks. I felt my stomach drop. My hands went ice cold. I didn't respond. I just blocked the number and tried to convince myself it was some sick prank. But deep down, I knew the truth. Julian was still out there, and he wasn't done. Moving into my new apartment in East Village felt like a fresh start, a real taste of independence. No more dorms, no more shared bathrooms, and most importantly, no random roommates. At least that's what I thought. I had signed the lease months ago, and the rental agency assured me the place would be empty until the semester started. It was a small but decent 2-bedroom unit on the 3rd floor of an old brick building, the kind that creaked with every step, but had character. The rent was cheap for Manhattan, which should have been my first red flag. The move-in went smoothly until that night. I was unpacking when I heard movement in the other bedroom. A slow shuffle, like someone dragging their feet across the wooden floor. My stomach tightened. I was supposed to be alone. Heart pounding, I knocked on the door. It creaked open, and there she was. A girl, tall, pale as a ghost, with dark circles under her eyes. She had long, unwashed hair that clung to her face like she hadn't showered in weeks. She stared at me for an uncomfortable amount of time before finally speaking. "You must be Nicole," she said, voice raspy. I took a step back. What the hell was she doing in my apartment? "I'm Delilah, I live here." No, she didn't. I called the rental agency the next morning demanding answers. Their response? "That apartment should be vacant. You're the only tenant on record." Great. So who the hell was Delilah? I decided I'd just avoid her as much as possible, but that was easier said than done because she never left her room. And then, the noises started. At night, I heard scraping sounds against the walls, soft whispers, like she was talking to someone. But every time I checked, she was alone. One night, I woke up to the sound of my bedroom door creaking. My breath caught in my throat. I turned my head slowly and saw her standing in the hallway. She wasn't moving. She wasn't blinking. She was just watching me. I wanted to scream, but I was frozen. After what felt like an eternity, she turned and walked back into her room, locking the door behind her. That was the first time I noticed something. She always locked her door. But I needed to know what was inside that room. I couldn't take it anymore. Between the whispers at night, the scratches on the walls, and Delilah watching me while I slept, my sanity was hanging by a thread. Something about her wasn't right. She didn't act like a normal person. She moved like a shadow, barely making a sound. And that locked door? It was taunting me. One night, when I was sure she had gone out, I decided to look inside. The door was locked, as expected. But something told me this wasn't a normal lock. It was old, rusted, breakable. I hesitated only for a moment before grabbing a bobby pin from my desk and working on the lock. My heart was racing, my hands slick with sweat. It took me longer than I'd like to admit, but eventually, with a soft click, the door creaked open. The smell hit me first. A rotting metallic stench so thick it made me gag. The room was a nightmare. There was no bed, just a dirty mattress on the floor covered in dark stains. The windows were boarded up from the inside, blocking out any light. Scattered across the floor were photographs, burnt and torn, faces scratched out. Some of them had names written on the back. names that weren't mine. And then I saw the plastic bags. Some were open. Dark, wet shapes filled the inside, slick and raw. My stomach twisted. Meat. But what kind? That's when I saw the hand. A human hand peeking out from beneath the mattress, fingers curled and stiff. I stumbled back, knocking over a chair. My mind was screaming at me to run, get out, call the police. And then I heard it, the soft creak of the front door opening. I froze, my body going completely cold. Delilah was back, and she was standing right outside the room. I turned, heart pounding so hard I could barely breathe. She was smiling, her dark eyes gleaming in the dim light. "You weren't supposed to see that," she whispered. Her voice was so calm, so detached, like I hadn't just found a corpse under her bed. I took a shaky step back. "Delilah, what is this?" My voice was barely more than a whisper. She tilted her head. "Home." Then she lunged. I barely dodged her as she grabbed for me, her nails raking across my arm. I bolted for the front door, but she was fast. Faster than she had any right to be. I slammed into the door, yanking at the handle. Locked. No, no, no. She was behind me. Too close. I spun around, my eyes darting toward the kitchen. A knife. I needed a weapon. I dashed toward the counter, grabbing the first thing I could, a heavy glass vase. Delilah lunged again. I swung with everything I had. The vase shattered against her head, sending her crashing to the floor. She didn't scream. She didn't even flinch. She just started laughing. Low. Hollow. Wrong. I ran. This time I didn't stop. I burst out of the apartment, screaming for help as I stumbled down the hallway. A neighbor opened their door, startled, but I didn't wait to explain. I was already on my way to the police station. The cops found the body, or what was left of it. The remains belonged to a girl who had gone missing 6 months earlier, the original tenant of my apartment. But Delilah? Gone. She vanished without a trace. No ID, no records, nothing. Like she never existed. The police searched for her for weeks. I moved out immediately, changing apartments, changing numbers, changing everything. I never heard from her again. But sometimes, when I'm alone in my new place, I still hear the whispers. And I wonder if Delilah ever really left at all. I probably should have been more careful when I started looking for a roommate, but hindsight is always 20/20, right? I was 22 when this happened, and looking back now, I can't believe the decisions I made. Some of them were downright stupid. But before I get into the real story, there's something you need to know, something I never planned on sharing. See, I had a stalker when I was younger. It started when I was around 14. At first, it was small things, anonymous notes left in my locker, messages about how beautiful I looked that day. It was creepy, sure, but back then, I was naive. I thought it was some harmless crush. It wasn't. Over the years, it escalated. Gifts on my doorstep, messages from unknown numbers, even pictures of me taken without my knowledge. My parents did everything they could to keep me safe. We changed numbers, moved houses, installed security cameras, and then, one day, it just stopped. No more notes, no more messages, just silence. I should have felt relieved, and in a way I did. But the paranoia never left me. I was always looking over my shoulder, always second-guessing the people around me. I told myself it was over, that I was free. I was wrong. By 2019, I was living in New York City, studying journalism at NYU. Rent was insane, so I decided to get a roommate. I was careful. At least I thought I was. I only took applications from women. I did background checks. I met with them in public places. I thought I was doing everything right. And then I met Lena. She seemed perfect. She was quiet, polite, said she worked remotely as a freelance graphic designer. She had this shy, almost awkward way of speaking that made her seem harmless. She told me she'd just gotten out of a bad relationship and needed a fresh start. I didn't see any red flags. No weird social media posts, no strange behavior. She was nice, so I let her move in. For the first few weeks, things were fine. She was clean, paid rent on time, even made me dinner a few times. It was nice. But then, little things started happening. Lena never left the apartment. Ever. I mean, I get it. Working from home, introverted, whatever. But she was always there. If I went out, she'd text me constantly, asking where I was, when I'd be back. If I had friends over, she'd sit in her room with the door slightly open, just listening. One night I woke up to the feeling of being watched. I turned over and there she was, standing in my doorway, motionless. I blinked. "Lena," she smiled. "I like watching you sleep." I laughed, thinking she was joking, but she didn't laugh back. She just stood there staring until I told her to go back to bed. That was the first time I felt truly uncomfortable. But it was only the beginning. At first I tried to brush it off. Maybe Lena was just socially awkward. Maybe she was one of those people who didn't understand personal boundaries. But then things started getting stranger. It was little things at first. I'd come home and find my closet door slightly open when I was sure I had closed it. My toothbrush would be wet even though I hadn't used it yet. I'd find my laundry folded in my room, even though I never asked her to do it. It was unsettling, but nothing I could outright call dangerous. Then, the messages started. One night I was lying in bed when my phone buzzed. It was from my ex-boyfriend. "I miss you too." My stomach dropped. I hadn't talked to him in over a year. I clicked on our chat history and saw a message sent from my phone earlier that night. "Do you ever think about me?" I felt sick. I hadn't sent that. I checked my other messages, and there were more. Texts to old friends I hadn't spoken to in years. Random heart emojis. A message to my mom saying, "I feel so alone." I locked my phone and tried to convince myself it was a glitch. Maybe my phone got hacked. Maybe I was just being paranoid. The next morning, I set up a small camera in the living room while Lena was in the shower. I just needed to see if I was imagining things, if maybe I was losing my mind. But when I checked the footage the next day, I realized I wasn't. At 3 a.m. while I was fast asleep, Lena was in my room. She stood at the foot of my bed watching me. For 2 hours. Then she left, only to come back minutes later and lay down on the floor beside my bed. I don't remember falling asleep, but I remember waking up that morning feeling off. Like something had happened and I just didn't know what. I needed to get out. That night I stayed late at a coffee shop near campus, too scared to go home. I texted my friend Jack and told him everything. He thought I was overreacting at first, but when I sent him the footage, his response was immediate. "Get the hell out of there, now." I didn't want to confront her directly. Instead, I decided I'd leave for a few days, tell her I was visiting family, and then figure out a way to break the lease. I packed a small bag and was about to head out when I heard something in the living room. Lena was humming. It was soft, almost a whisper, but I recognized the tune immediately. It was the lullaby my mom used to sing to me when I was a kid. How did she know that? I peered out of my bedroom and saw her sitting on the couch, cradling something in her arms. A small, human-shaped doll. I stepped closer. There was something on its face. A picture of me, stapled onto the doll's head. I must have made a noise because Lena turned to look at me, her face lighting up like she had just seen an old friend. "I finally made it perfect," she whispered. That was it. That was my breaking point. I bolted for the door, but before I could reach it, she was already standing in front of me. "I don't want you to leave," she murmured. I pushed past her and ran into the hallway, dialing Jack as fast as I could. He lived only 5 minutes away, but those 5 minutes felt like an eternity. From the hallway, I watched through the small gap in the door as Lena walked back and forth in the apartment, talking to the doll like it was me. Jack arrived just as she started crying, rocking back and forth on the couch. "She's dangerous," I told him, my hands shaking. "We have to call the police." Jack didn't hesitate. He called the police while I stood frozen in the hallway. my heart pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. Inside the apartment, Lena was still whispering to the doll. I couldn't make out the words, but her voice had this eerie, sing-song quality, like she was comforting a child. Minutes later, sirens filled the street. 2 officers knocked on the door while Jack and I stood to the side watching. When they went inside, I heard one of them gasp. "Ma'am, can you tell us your name?" one officer asked. Lena didn't answer. "Ma'am, do you know where you are?" She lifted her head and her voice was disturbingly calm. "I'm home. With her." She looked at me then, her eyes wide, unblinking. "She's mine," she whispered. One of the officers reached to cover her with a blanket, but she threw it off violently. That's when I saw it. She had carved my name into her forearm over and over like a ritual. I felt bile rise in my throat. Then she said something that made the room spin. "You don't remember me, do you?" the officer asked where she was from. She said the name of my hometown. For a second, I thought I misheard, but then she kept going, talking about our high school, my old car, the places I used to go. That's when it all clicked, my stalker. It had never been some random guy. It was Lena. The notes, the gifts, the photos, it was all her. And I had invited her into my home. The officers decided she was a danger to herself and took her into custody. She didn't fight. She just kept smiling at me like we shared some kind of secret. Later, after they took her away, Jack and I went into her room. What we found still haunts me. Her closet was covered in photos of me, pictures from high school, screenshots of my old social media posts, images of me sleeping, eating, walking around New York. And in the center of it all was a journal, filled with pages of my name over and over. But the worst part? There was a printed copy of my old roommate ad. Next to it, in shaky handwriting, she had written, "I finally made it happen." A few days later, I got an email. It was from Lena's mother. She told me that Lena had always been obsessive, that she'd had an unhealthy attachment to me since high school, but no one had ever realized how bad it had gotten. "She always talked about you like you were best friends," her mom wrote, "like you belonged to her." I moved out of that apartment immediately. I changed my number, deleted old social media accounts, and made sure my name wasn't listed anywhere online. But even now, years later, I still feel it. That itching sensation in the back of my neck. That fear that someone somewhere is still watching me. Because no matter how many doors I lock, how many times I check my surroundings, I'll never know if she's really gone. I never thought I'd end up in a situation like this. When I moved to Austin, I was just looking for a fresh start, a new city, a new job, and hopefully a decent place to live. The apartment hunt wasn't going well. Everything was too expensive, too small, or just plain awful. Then I found Josh's listing. A massive house in the outskirts of the city, cheap rent, and only one other roommate. It seemed too good to be true. But when I met Josh, he was surprisingly normal. Mid-30s, laid back, worked as a traveling contractor, and barely spent time at home. That meant I'd have the place to myself most of the time. "Just one thing," he had said casually while giving me the tour. "The basement's off limits." I had chuckled, thinking it was just for storage or something. "Got any skeletons down there?" Josh didn't laugh. He just stared at me for a second before shrugging. "Nah, just some personal stuff. Don't worry about it." I should have worried. The first week was fine. The house was quiet, almost too quiet. At night, though, I started noticing weird sounds. Scraping noises, soft thuds, and what sounded like something shifting downstairs. At first, I brushed it off as the house settling, or maybe an animal outside. But as the nights went on, the sounds became deliberate. One night, around 2 a.m., I woke up to a noise right outside my bedroom door. Slow, heavy breathing. My heart stopped. I lay still, barely even breathing myself, listening. Then, the sound of something sniffing. I finally gathered enough courage to sit up and turn on my bedside lamp. Silence. I waited a full minute before creeping toward the door and pressing my ear against it. Nothing. I cracked the door open just a little. The hallway was empty. I let out a shaky breath and told myself I was just paranoid. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The noises, the breathing, the way Josh had reacted when I joked about the basement. So one night, while he was out of town, I decided to take a look. I found a spare key on the kitchen counter, probably for the front door, but I figured it was worth a shot. Heart pounding, I walked to the basement door and slid the key into the lock. A quiet click. It worked. The door creaked open, revealing complete darkness. A wave of cold air hit me, carrying a musty, metallic scent. I reached for the light switch on the wall and flicked it on. My stomach turned. The basement wasn't for storage. The walls were lined with old, rusted chains. Heavy-duty locks dangled from metal loops bolted into the concrete. In the center of the room, there was a single filthy mattress with thick leather straps attached to it. A metal bucket sat nearby, reeking of something I didn't want to think about. And then I saw the worst part. In the far corner, behind a stack of old crates, something moved. A foot. A human foot. I couldn't breathe. My brain screamed at me to run, but my legs refused to move. The foot twitched. Then, a quiet, raspy voice. "Help. Me." I stumbled backward, knocking over a crate. The sound echoed through the basement like a gunshot. The person, if they were still alive, was too weak to move. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone to call 911. But before I could dial, I heard something else. The sound of tires crunching gravel outside. Josh was home. I turned off the light and bolted up the stairs, locking the basement door behind me. I sprinted to my room just as I heard the front door open. I barely had time to think. My phone was in my hand, but if I called 911 now, he'd hear me. Then footsteps. Slow, steady, coming down the hall, stopping right outside my door. I held my breath. The doorknob twisted once, then again harder this time. "Hey, Daniel." Josh's voice came through the door, too calm, too steady. "You in there?" I stayed silent. The doorknob rattled violently. I had no choice. My window. It was my only way out. I yanked it open and climbed onto the roof, my heart hammering. The second my feet hit the shingles, my bedroom door burst open. Josh stood there, staring at me, holding something in his hand. A knife. I didn't think. I just ran. I slid down the sloped roof, barely catching myself before hitting the ground. My ankle twisted as I landed, pain shooting up my leg, but I forced myself forward. I sprinted across the yard, waving my arms at an oncoming car. The driver slammed the brakes. A woman in her late 40s rolled down the window, eyes wide. "Are you okay?" "Call the police," I gasped. "Now." She did. The cops arrived within minutes, but by the time they entered the house, Josh was gone. The basement, however, told them everything they needed to know. They found the person chained up, a young woman who had been missing for over a month. She was alive, barely. Josh was caught a week later trying to leave Texas under a fake name. His face was all over the news. He had done this before. He had killed before. And I had been living under the same roof as him. To this day, I can't sleep without checking the locks, without making sure there's no breathing outside my door. Some people get lucky with their roommates. I almost didn't. If you're ever looking for a roommate, be careful. I made the mistake of trusting someone I didn't know, someone who nearly killed me. It all started when I moved to Chicago, Illinois for a new job. The city was expensive, and my paycheck wasn't exactly covering my rent, so I decided to find a roommate. I posted an ad on a local website and got a few responses, most of them weird or clearly from scammers. But then Isabel Monroe reached out. She was a nurse, had great references, and seemed polite in her messages. It felt like a safe choice, so I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop. She was a little awkward, barely made eye contact, but she was friendly enough. Besides, she had a steady job and seemed responsible. What more could I ask for? So, a week later, Isabel moved in. At first, she kept to herself. I figured she was just introverted, maybe shy. But the way she avoided me was off-putting. Whenever I walked into the kitchen, she'd immediately get up and leave. She never made conversation, barely even looked in my direction. I brushed it off. Some people are just like that, right? Then, I started noticing things. At night, I'd hear soft murmurs coming from her room like she was talking to someone, but there was never a second voice. The worst part? The chemical smell that would waft out of her bathroom. It was strong, almost medicinal, like something you'd expect in a hospital. I told myself it was none of my business, I should have paid more attention. It wasn't until one night that I realized something was seriously wrong. I woke up around 2 a.m. to get some water. As I rolled over, my heart nearly stopped. My bedroom door was open. I was sure I had closed it, locked it. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I slowly sat up. My eyes darted toward the doorway, and that's when I saw it. A shadow disappearing down the hall. I grabbed my phone and checked the security camera I had installed near the entrance just in case. The footage made my stomach turn. Isabel had been standing in my doorway, watching me, for nearly 3 hours. She didn't move. She didn't do anything. Just stood there silently in the dark. I wanted to confront her, but how? What would I even say? Hey, were you just staring at me for hours while I slept? Instead, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe she was sleepwalking. Maybe I had imagined it. Then she started changing her behavior. Suddenly, Isabel became friendly. Too friendly. She started making me breakfast every morning, waiting for me at the table with a plate of food and a forced smile. At first, it was awkward, but after a while, I got used to it. Who was I to turn down a free meal? But something about her kindness felt off. She was always watching. Her eyes lingered on me too long, as if she were studying me, waiting for something. And then, the sickness started. At first, it was just small things, a little dizziness here and there, a headache that wouldn't go away. I chalked it up to stress, maybe lack of sleep. But then it got worse. I started waking up exhausted even after sleeping for hours. My limbs felt heavy, like they didn't belong to me. My head was in a constant fog, and no matter how much water I drank or how much rest I got, I felt off. Then came the hallucinations. One night I was watching TV when I saw something move in my peripheral vision. I turned my head quickly, expecting to see Isabel, but there was no one there. Another time, I heard someone whispering my name while I was in the shower. I ripped the curtain open, but again, nothing. I told myself it was just paranoia. Maybe I was really that stressed. But deep down, I knew something was wrong with me. My boyfriend started noticing too. I told him everything. How I felt like I was losing my mind, how I couldn't think straight, how I felt sick all the time. He insisted I see a doctor. So I did. I had blood tests, allergy tests, even a brain scan. And every single one came back normal. But I wasn't normal. I felt like I was dying. And then one morning, I found out why. I had gotten up earlier than usual, and as I walked toward the kitchen, I saw Isabel standing at the counter. She was making me breakfast, the same way she did every morning. I was about to greet her when she did something that stopped me cold. She reached under the sink, pulled out a small bottle, unscrewed the cap, and poured something into my smoothie. I felt my stomach turn. I knew. I didn't need to see the label. I knew. Heart pounding, I rushed back to my room, pretending I hadn't seen anything. I crawled back into bed, trying to stay calm, trying to think. A few minutes later, she knocked on my door, tray in hand, smiling. "I made you breakfast," she said sweetly. I told her I was too nauseous to eat. Her smile faltered, just for a second. Then she placed the tray on my nightstand and left. The moment I heard the front door shut behind her, I ran to the kitchen. I grabbed the bottle. My hands trembled as I turned it over, reading the label. Tetrachloreto de carbono, a highly toxic solvent. She was poisoning me. I felt my stomach drop. My mind raced, piecing everything together. The fatigue, the hallucinations, the nausea. Isabel had been poisoning me this entire time. I grabbed my phone and called my boyfriend. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely dial. When he answered, I whispered, "She's poisoning me. I saw her do it." He was at my apartment within minutes. I stuffed the bottle into a plastic bag and we rushed to the hospital. The doctors ran a specific test for toxins, and sure enough, my blood was full of carbon tetrachloride. "If you had continued ingesting this," one doctor told me, "you wouldn't have made it another month." I should have been dead, but I wasn't. And now, I needed proof. That night, I acted as normal as possible. I sat with Isabel in the living room, pretending to be grateful for all her help. I even let her make me another meal. But this time, I didn't eat it. I waited until she went to bed, then poured it into a container. My boyfriend and I took it straight to the police. They ran tests. The food was laced with poison, and that was enough. That evening, detectives knocked on our door. Isabel answered with a smile. That same eerie, polite smile she always had. Then they arrested her. I watched as she stood there completely calm, as if this was just another normal day. And then just before they put her in the squad car, she turned to me. She smiled. And then she said, "You were supposed to die." The investigation uncovered something even worse. Isabel had done this before, in another city, another state, another roommate. But she had left before the girl ever figured out what was happening. I was the first one to survive long enough to stop her. She was sentenced to 10 years in prison for attempted murder. You'd think I'd feel relief, but I didn't. I just felt cold. Because every time I close my eyes, I see her face, that smile, and I wonder how many others never figured it out in time. If you've never lived with a stranger before, you don't really think about all the things that could go wrong. I mean, we hear crazy roommate horror stories all the time, but you never expect to actually live through one. When I moved to Seattle for work, I didn't know a single person. Rent was expensive and I needed a roommate fast. That's how I met Logan Pierce, a med student at the University of Washington. He seemed chill, quiet, kept to himself, didn't party, and paid his half of the rent on time. Honestly, that was all I needed. At first, everything was fine. We'd occasionally chat in the kitchen, nothing deep, just casual small talk. I noticed he didn't have any friends over, ever. No family visits, no weekend hangouts, just work, school, and coming home to lock himself in his room. But hey, I'm not the most social person either, so I didn't think much of it. Then about a month in, the noises started. It always happened late at night, usually between 2 and 3 a.m. I'd wake up to the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, moving around the apartment. At first, I assumed it was Logan going to the kitchen for a late-night snack or something. But then I noticed the way the footsteps stopped, sometimes just outside my bedroom door. I'd hold my breath, listening. Then, after a minute or two, the footsteps would move away, back toward his room. The next morning, I casually asked Logan if he had trouble sleeping. He just shrugged. "I sleep fine," he said, like it was nothing. I didn't push it. Maybe I was overthinking it, but the noises didn't stop. They got worse. One night I woke up feeling off. You know that weird sensation when you just know someone is watching you? My heart was racing before I even opened my eyes. And when I did, Logan was standing in my doorway. I couldn't see his face in the darkness, just his silhouette. He wasn't moving, just standing there. "Logan?" My voice came out shaky. "Nothing." He stood there for another second before slowly turning and walking away, disappearing into the hallway. The next morning, I confronted him about it. He seemed genuinely confused, even laughing it off. "Dude, I have no idea what you're talking about. Maybe I was sleepwalking?" He said it like it was a joke, but something in his tone felt off. That should have been enough to make me leave. I should have started looking for a new place right then and there. But I didn't, because Logan was a good roommate. He paid rent. He was clean. And I didn't exactly have a line of people waiting to split a lease with me. So I let it go. And that was the biggest mistake of my life. After that night, I started locking my bedroom door. I told myself it was just precautionary, that Logan wasn't dangerous, just a weird sleepwalker. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. And then the objects started moving. It was little things at first. My phone wouldn't be where I left it. My shoes, always lined up by the door, would be slightly off. Once, I found my wallet on the kitchen counter, even though I was sure I left it in my backpack. It was weird, but not enough to make me panic. That changed when I woke up one morning to find my laptop open. I always closed it before bed, always. But that morning, it was on, my emails pulled up. Nothing was sent, nothing changed, just open like someone had been reading through it. I tried to convince myself I was being paranoid. Maybe I forgot to close it. Maybe I was just imagining things. Then one night I heard something new. I woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of whispering. It was faint, almost like a conversation, but there was only one voice. I sat up, trying to place where it was coming from. My heart was pounding as I realized it was coming from inside Logan's room. The whispering grew louder, faster. I couldn't make out words, just this low, urgent mumbling. It sounded like he was arguing with someone, but he was alone. I wanted to ignore it. I really did. But something about the way he was talking, it wasn't normal. It sounded wrong. I got up, walked slowly to his door, and pressed my ear against it. The second I did, silence. The whispering stopped. I stepped back, my skin crawling. Then, the doorknob rattled. I didn't stick around to find out what happened next. I went straight back to my room and locked the door. The next morning, Logan was his usual self, calm, quiet, like nothing happened. I almost convinced myself I imagined the whole thing, until I noticed something on the floor, a photo. I picked it up, feeling my stomach drop. It was a Polaroid picture of me, asleep. My breath caught in my throat, my bed, my blanket, my face completely relaxed in sleep. I stared at it, my hands shaking. Where the hell did this come from? I muttered under my breath. Then I heard a voice behind me. Logan. Must have been sleepwalking, he said casually, sipping his coffee. Maybe I'm a sleep photographer now. He laughed, like it was a joke. I didn't laugh. That day I went out and bought a new doorknob with a lock. That night, for the first time in months, I went to sleep feeling safe. But Logan wasn't done yet. Not even close. That night, I locked my door. For the first time since Logan moved in, I actually felt some kind of control. He wouldn't be able to come in. He wouldn't be able to stand in my doorway. He wouldn't be able to take any more pictures of me while I slept. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting for something to happen. And then, around 3:12 a.m., it did. Bang. I shot up in bed. Bang, bang. My heart nearly stopped. Logan was hitting my door, hard. I held my breath. The banging didn't stop. Over and over, his body slammed against the door like he was trying to force it open, like he didn't understand why it wasn't opening like usual. Then, silence. I sat frozen, barely breathing, waiting. Suddenly, scraping. A slow, deliberate scratching against the wood, like he was dragging something sharp down the length of the door. I wanted to scream at him to stop, to go back to his room, but I didn't. I just sat there, gripping my blanket, my heart pounding. Minutes passed. The scraping stopped, and then footsteps. They faded down the hall back to his room. I didn't sleep after that. The next morning, I opened my door, half expecting to see deep claw marks in the wood. But there was nothing. No scratches, no dents, nothing to prove what had happened. Logan was in the kitchen making coffee, looking like he'd slept through the night. I didn't say anything. Neither did he. But I knew then, this wasn't sleepwalking. That afternoon, I went into his room. I don't even know what I was looking for. Answers? Proof? A reason to leave? His room was normal. Too normal. His bed was perfectly made. His desk was spotless. Nothing on the walls, no personal items, nothing. But then I noticed the closet. I hesitated. Then slowly I pulled the door open. At first it looked like any other closet. Clothes, shoes, a duffel bag. But then I spotted something in the back, tucked away under a pile of shirts. A small wooden box. I knelt down and grabbed it, my hands shaking. It was heavy. I flipped open the latch. Inside were more Polaroids, dozens of them, all of me, sleeping, sitting at my desk, watching TV. One was from last week, one from 2 days ago. He'd been taking these for months. My stomach twisted as I shuffled through them. Then, at the bottom of the box, I saw something else. A knife, 6 inches long, sharp, resting right next to my photos like it belonged there. I felt sick. And that's when I heard the door click shut behind me. I turned around slowly. Logan was standing there, watching me. His eyes dropped to the open box in my hands. And for the first time since I met him, I saw something change in his expression. Not surprise, annoyance, like I'd ruined some kind of plan. I didn't move. Neither did Logan. For a few seconds, we just stood there staring at each other. The open box in my hands, the knife resting inside it. Then he smiled. It wasn't the kind of smile you give when you're caught doing something stupid or embarrassing. No, this was something else. Something wrong. I was wondering when you'd find that, he said, his voice calm. Too calm. My throat was dry. I wanted to say something, anything, but my mind was racing too fast. The box felt heavier in my hands. I could see the sharp glint of the knife just inches away. Logan took a slow step forward. I snapped. I don't even remember making the decision. I just threw the box at him and ran. The photos scattered across the floor as I bolted past him, shoving him out of the way. I could hear him stumbling behind me, but I didn't look back. I sprinted down the hallway, past the kitchen, straight for the front door. Locked. My shaking hands fumbled with the deadbolt. Behind me, I could hear Logan moving, fast. The second I got the lock undone, I yanked the door open and ran into the street. I didn't stop. Not until I was halfway down the block, breathless, heart slamming against my ribs. I called the police. By the time they arrived, Logan was gone. The apartment was empty. His room, completely cleared out. It was like he had never even lived there. The only thing left behind was the box and the photos. The police took my statement, but there wasn't much they could do. Logan Pierce, or whoever the hell he really was, didn't exist. The name he used, the ID he gave our landlord, all fake. The only real clue I had was the name I found when I searched deeper, Matthew Pierce. A man with the same face as Logan, but older, with a long history of psychological issues and violent tendencies. The most disturbing part, his brother, the real Logan Pierce, had been missing for years. I moved out the next week, and I never heard from him again. But sometimes, in the middle of the night, I wake up with that same feeling, that itching sensation that someone is watching me. And every time I can't help but wonder, is he still out there? Is he watching someone else sleep now? Or worse, is he watching me?